Hey, what's good? Welcome to the Vocal Minority Report. It's your boy MC. As always, you could have downloaded, or I guess in this case, watched any podcast in the world, but you're here with me. I appreciate that. Got a great show for you today. Jumping right into it, talking about the Amber Guyger murder trial, day 4. She's on trial for killing 26-year-old accountant Botham Jean, an unarmed black man who was sitting in his home, apparently on the couch, eating a bowl of ice cream, watching television. That is what the defense has, that's what the prosecution has said over and over again. I don't know if I mentioned this in earlier episodes this week, but if you know me or listen to the show, you know that I'm generally pro-defendant in most cases, and usually are not taking such a strong stance in support of the state and prosecution because I know that they often get it wrong, and then I also know that over 95% of cases are pled out anyway, generally under a lot of pressure. So in these cases where trials do go to juries, they are extremely important to watch because that system is very important. The value that the jury has in making the right decision is extremely important. And I really think that oftentimes too much is put on the defense attorneys and the prosecution and the judge, and not enough is put on the juries to make the right call based on the evidence. So that's why it's really interesting in this case to be like a 13th juror, if you will, and be able to see all of the evidence that's presented, even the evidence that they didn't get to see, as I mentioned earlier this week. So, but let's move on from that and talk about the main thing of today, and that is that the prosecution rests. And the prosecution rests after 3 full days, maybe 3.5. And I don't know the number of witnesses, but a pretty good number of witnesses. The witness array included obviously neighbors, law enforcement, both Dallas police officers, first responders, a fireman, also a first responder, and multiple people from the Texas Rangers, which is a division of our state troopers here in Texas, and as well as the Dallas County Prosecutor's Office, who obviously the prosecutor works for, which is interesting. And I know a lot of folks have had some consternation about the prosecution prosecuting the police and, in effect, prosecuting themselves, and how it might look when their witnesses, are called, especially the Texas Rangers, who there were at least 2 investigators. Obviously, there's Major David Armstrong, who is full of problems that I really don't even have time to get into at this juncture, because he too has a history of killing someone in an accident. But this was a car accident, a vehicle accident, and I'll have to tell you the details of that at another juncture. But I really want to get into the point of the prosecution questioning the Texas troopers, Armstrong, and then some other gentlemen, a ballistics expert, and then as well as additional investigators. Because what had happened was the prosecutor would present the witness, would ask them strategic questions, usually while or after showing video, to support that Guyger had plenty of time to make a decision and make the right decision, another decision. So I think he did not a masterful job, but because there's other ADAs, I think they did a pretty masterful job considering what they're up against. Now, one thing that they have on their side is they know how police works, in effect. I mean, they work hand in hand, the DA's office, with the police all the time, every day, trying hundreds of cases, thousands of cases. So knowing that, they know how to question, they know what standard procedure is generally, and they also have what is an open and shut case, right? So they need the troopers to talk about their investigative efforts, but more in a way that shows what does the room look like, what did you see, were her actions reasonable? Now, we know that Major Armstrong said her actions weren't reasonable. We discussed that yesterday, but I wanted to get on that too because another prosecution witness today admitted while they were talking about her utility belt because, let's see, let me get to her utility belt here. Okay. While they were talking about Amber Guyger's utility belt, the prosecution was making the point that she had multiple other items to use rather than her gun. I mean, you can see her belt there. She's got a taser. She had a knife. She had your normal accoutrement on your utility belt, right? So she had plenty of options to use other than to shoot him. You know, obviously retreating, concealment, call for backup, not go in the apartment. We have several things, but then the prosecution was saying, well, look at her utility belt. What other options did he have? And so when the state trooper was on the stand, the Texas Ranger, and was being cross-examined by the defense, of course, he made the point that, well, would you really use those in a deadly situation? Of course not. You would pull your gun. You would not pull one of your other items, you know, for a less lethal encounter. So, and of course, the trooper agreed. But I think that's a reasonable thought, but we're not talking about a dangerous situation, which I keep harping on. And so it'll be interesting now that the state has rested what the defense comes with. That starts today, 8:30 this morning, because I'm doing this on Friday instead of Thursday night. So that starts today, Friday morning, and it'll be interesting because we know the defense is going to be hard charging that she followed procedure. I imagine that they're going to recall Major Armstrong and that they're going to recall the state troopers who have spoken favorably of them when it came from a procedural standpoint. So let's get into what the defense did. Godly. See, I'm so pro-defense usually that I can't get it right. Let's get into what the prosecution talked about prior to resting their case to kind of put a bow on their case, and why I think it was okay. Several people have asked me, do I think this was too quick? You know, I'm not an attorney. I'm just an observer and a watcher of a lot of these type of cases. And I just have to go with the judges and what the attorneys thought initially. And they thought about a 2-week case, which makes sense. I mean, you have a week for each side to present their case. And in this case, the prosecution just beat it by a day or two, which did surprise several people, I think, including the judge and the defense, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. So to start the day, though, Judge Kemp came in. She was rocking her glasses for the first time. She still remains very much in charge of the courtroom. I like her rapport with the attorneys. I like her rapport with the jury, and I like how she's handling that. But they resumed with the DPD crime scene analyst, resuming her testimony. She was showing pictures of Amber Guyger and Botham Jean's apartment, of Botham Jean's apartment from her vantage point, which was important because she is 5'3", and they said earlier this week that Guyger is 5'1". So by 2 inches or so, you've got her vantage point standing in the front door, exactly what she could see. So they showed those pictures the day before, though, and I thought that was pretty good testimony. There was nothing to impugn her with. The defense tried to say that, you know, she wasn't wearing the same gear that the officer wears, and of course she's an analyst, but she does wear a uniform, and so I think that went over well. After that, though, pretty strong testimony from Dallas Police Officer Wynn. He was one of the first responders there, 3rd, 4th, 5th on the scene, him and his partner. And he also attempted to save Mr. John's life. But in doing so, you know, if you've looked at the pictures of the flip-flops and you see the shoes moved, he's the one that moved the shoes. Because if you remember, Armstrong was speculating on the movement of the shoes, trying to say where Botham Jean was standing when he was shot. So that's why it was critical for the defense, the prosecution, to have Officer Wynn testify to show his body cam footage that shows his proximity to him. It also shows him in between Mr. John's legs, moving the shoes, essentially kicking them behind him so he could lift John's feet to treat him for shock, to get that blood circulating. His Officer Lee's partner Blair moved the ottoman, and all of that is caught on Officer Wynn's body cam. So that footage was shown. Again, I think that's very helpful because it allows, it dispels anything that the prosecution or that the defense would say about where he was standing or shot, and it also it explains why things were moved. It was done by the police to save his life. So I've already touched on the cross-examination of law enforcement. And the next couple of witnesses, there were ballistics experts that testified, and that was again pretty favorable to the prosecution because, in the expert's opinion, where the shot was fired from, it's as if she came through the room firing. The trajectory of the bullet happened early in the. I don't have the picture to put up. Sorry about that. But the trajectory of the bullet happened very early. So he was able to surmise that the bullet traveled in a direction from right at the doorway or just inside the doorway, if you will. So that says a lot of things, obviously, as most of us believe. She shot him. She came in shooting. He said that there was about a 5-degree variance in his measurement, plus or minus. But that angle, if you're looking at the trajectory, how the bullet flew, and to the wall to the right from where she's standing in the doorway, that you can kind of see that. So that 5-degree movement, I feel is a bit negligible, as if I really know. But so that was pretty powerful. And on the prosecution side, the defense can come into play and dispute that a bit because obviously no one knows exactly why. And could she have been closer to him? Yes. And do we know exactly where he was standing? We don't. But I did not mention the medical examiner's testimony yesterday. Obviously said John never had a chance. He was struck immediately in that upper left chest, and it blew right through his heart, essentially. And that's one reason why there's not a lot of blood either, because he was not just bleeding out based on where the bullet was. So speaking of not a lot of blood, now this is something that is really controversial in my opinion. So I think it's controversial for a couple of different reasons. So I'm going to show you here Amber Guyger's gloves that were taken from her uniform. You can see that they look unused. They certainly don't have blood on them, and makes you wonder, did she ever try to help Botham Jean? Because if I think we've all probably used some of these gloves before. When you take them off, aren't they inside out automatically? Because they're kind of sweaty. Well, I got sweaty hands, but they're kind of sweaty. You take them out, they're inside out, and usually you would just toss them down. These were taken from her uniform, and doesn't believe they were used at all. Now, the counter to that is Officer Lee did testify that he didn't have blood on him. And he was in direct contact with Mr. John as well, clearly trying to save his life. So I'm not trying to defend Guyger by any means, but I also want to be somewhat balanced in saying that there could be a reason that they don't have blood on them and that she doesn't have blood on her. But when you look at these gloves, just ask yourself, do they look used at all? Do they look used at all? I think the answer is clearly no. So today, a lot of procedural testimony happened today, and that's pretty much all I have to go over with for the testimony. After the last witness was passed, then that's when the state rested, which again surprised everyone. So at that moment, oh wait, see, I've got to talk about the apartment pictures. Okay, here we go. Let's get into let's actually see Amber Guyger's apartment. So you can see the difference in the apartments, the layout. I've got a few more pictures of Botham Jean's apartment, but let's look at Amber Guyger's apartment real quick. All right, so you can see here vantage point right through the door. I know everyone has seen inside Botham Jean's apartment through this same point here. So here's picture one. I'm just going to go through these. Here's her kitchen counter. You can see much less clutter. It's very obvious there's nothing on her back wall. Completely different couch. You can see that right corner. Here's another vantage point of the entryway. Immediately, you see her table. You see her clock on the wall. Same thing. So no ottoman. Botham Jean does not have a back door or patio door, balcony door in his apartment. He also had a laptop or computer screen or something against or in front of where that window is on the right. You can look to the left there and see her television. Her television is relatively small compared to his. His was a 50-inch that the prosecution verified based on, A, you're looking at it, it looks pretty big. B, though, there was a box still in his closet because, you know, all of us keep our boxes for these electronics for some reason. So his box luckily was in the closet. But if you're looking at this picture, you can't tell me that's a 50-inch TV based on the little table it's sitting on. And, you know, just we all have TVs. This one's, well, of course we all have TVs, but looking at this one, I think one could probably speculate this is in the 40-inch range, maybe even a little bit smaller. So here we go, vantage point from her couch, clearly a much different color, decorated completely different. I mean, it's so overwhelming how little this looks like her apartment from these pictures here. So I've got a few pictures of Botham Jean's apartment, and I pardon the blood there on the side, but you can see inside his apartment from the angle right at the looks like the edge of the counter there. Ottoman, couch, TV stand. I mean, here's his kitchen counter. I mean, look at the medicine bottles, cleaning supplies. Shoot, there's Swisher paper, you know, for rolling blunts. I mean, the ottoman. This is clear as day. Clear as day. I said he didn't have a back door. There might be a back door there on the left. I apologize for making that error, if I made an error there. All right, so those are the pictures I have of his apartment, and you can clearly see the contrast between the two. It's so unreasonable that she could have thought that was her apartment. We still don't know if the kitchen light was on. I think the idea that the light was off, which I keep seeing people say, but I've seen no confirmation of that anywhere. And again, how would we ever know? Once she gets on the stand and testifies, it's going to be so interesting and critical to hear what she has to say to explain all of those little things away. I mean, we know she's going to say she feared for her life, and I expect a lot of crying and sobbing and a lot of praise of her for being a great police detective and all these things and a good daughter and whatever. But she's a murderer who killed this man, and I do think that the prosecution did a good job in laying out their case. As I mentioned earlier, I think their knowledge of police procedure and investigations was extremely critical. In this instance. And one thing I think is really interesting too that we have to remember is that Guyger is being defended by some pretty good attorneys as well. For instance, Toby Shook, one of her co-counsel, is a former district attorney, which is very common, district attorney from the district attorney's office to defense work. And so, he also has an intricate knowledge of the Dallas County District Attorney's Office and how they do things as well. So I think it's been a very a good match between the two. But I do think the prosecution is up. I think that although I'm surprised they rested their case, it made sense because what more can you say? We've seen the hallway, we've seen the setup, we've seen the red mat, we've seen the inside of both of their apartments. We've had numerous police officers say, including her partner, Martin Rivera, say that they would not have taken those actions and that there's other actions you could take. So, to me, that can cancel out what the troopers, rangers have said, about her culpability or level of culpability, especially since Armstrong has flip-flopped on that anyway. He told the family and others, and obviously he charged her with manslaughter to begin with. It was the Dallas County District Attorney that upgraded that charge to murder. So for him to flip-flop and change his testimony, I'm not too worried about. The jury didn't get to hear it. So we're in a really interesting place here when the trial starts today. As soon as the state rested, surprisingly yesterday, Guyger's defense attorney, of course, moved for a direct verdict of not guilty, stating the state had not proven each and every element of the indictment for murder and the manslaughter charges. He went through both, and of course, the prosecution responded and said, of course they had, and laid out how they had briefly, and obviously the court denied that motion and said, we'll see you tomorrow. So, and mentioned also they're going to work on Saturday, so I'll be back on Saturday evening, Sunday morning to give you an update on that one as well. But that is what we're looking at here. So it'll be really interesting starting today to see what witnesses the defense calls and what stand they really take, how ugly they are to Botham Jean and his legacy, playing the intruder and burglar card. So I can't wait to either hop on tonight or tomorrow and give you an update on all of that. So that's pretty much all I have. I can go ahead and cut this one short, I believe. Follow me on all the social medias. It's at Vocal Report on Twitter, The Vocal Minority on Instagram, The Vocal Minority Report on Facebook. You can find the show anywhere you get podcasts, and make sure you keep tuning in. We're going to try to grow this and keep going from there. So I'll holla at you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Peace.